Good morning and welcome everybody back to our sphere painting project. I'm glad you are all here. This has been a new experiment for us at the School of Atelier Arts where we're live streaming an entire class for free. If you want to learn more about the School of Atelier Arts, please visit our website at schoolofatelierarts.com. We have an extensive blog that covers painting and drawing techniques, more videos, lots of great resources. We have wonderful worksheet sets that will help you practice and drill different art techniques, so I hope you'll check it out. While you're here, please make sure to follow and like this video. You don't want to miss any of our future free classes. And welcome. So today, excuse me, today we're going to continue form painting, or also known as tiling. And this is a conceptual way of painting where you are trying to maximize the amount of volume you feel, particularly in the lights. So there's a few attributes of form painting that help make something look really, really round. The first one is diminishing the importance of shadows. So we talked a lot about this in our previous episodes in this series, about how the shadows have some subtle changes in them, but they're not very much. And we want to keep them the least important, because the flatter our shadows, the less important our shadows, the more the form is going to show up as we continue our tiling today. Go ahead and say hello in the chat. I'd love to know where you're calling in from today on this cold winter's morning. I hope everybody's staying safe in this unusual weather, especially our friends in the South. I'm just going to grab my coffee and my palette and we'll get started. Okay, so there's a few things to think about as we are continuing to work on our sphere today. So one thing is, where do we start, right? A lot of people, they just jump in without a plan, right? And then they wonder why they make a mess on their canvas later. Especially if you're new to oil painting, it's very, very important that you are methodical, that you have a plan, that you have a process. All right. So good morning, Leela. Welcome, Carolyn. So happy to have you back. 9 degrees in Southern Maryland. I feel so grateful to have a little wood burning stove in my studio. It's been a real savior. Okay, so this whole situation here, we need a plan. We need a plan, people. Okay. Now, almost always, I encourage my students to start from the shadow and work to the light. But what's going to happen today is that I feel like this might not be a good choice. That's a bad idea. Let's put it over here. What's going to happen today is that we're going to run out of shadow here, right? So if we start in our shadow and we work towards our lights, we're going to have a really difficult time once we run out of the shadow. So there's 2 ways to deal with this. One is that we finish working from our shadows until about here, and then we switch to coming down here, because remember, when we come out of the shadows, we go across, right? And so by the time we finish crossing from this way, it should fill in the gap that wasn't filled in by working from our shadows. So 2 different ways to think about it. I find that it's really difficult for me when I run out of shadow to just leave this one little itty bitty area here. So I tend to just still working from dark to light, but matching this darker 2.5 to 3 value on the outside edge, and I'll start working that way. But we don't have to make that decision right now. We can just work from our shadow into our light until we run out of shadow, and then make some choices. And welcome, Ellen. Good to see you, Pennsylvania. All right. So I have my palette, I have my brushes. I still have my palette mixed up from yesterday. Because we're working with titanium white tends to last for a fairly long time. We call that being open. So different pigments stay open for different lengths of time. You'll find that your earth pigments are really closed often, right? So they'll dry really, really fast on you, often within a day. So if you're painting with a lot of earth pigments, I tend not to leave those on my palette overnight. If I'm painting with a lot of titanium, like it's going to stay pretty, open. And welcome, Peter. Good to have you back. Okay, so I'm going to just start again with my shadow and work to my light. I don't really have a lot of new information for you. We're following the same methodology that we did in the previous episode. Anybody who's just like jumping in today and hasn't seen the previous episode, all of them are available on our Facebook, on our YouTube, and of course through our mailing list. So make sure that you join our mailing list because we send out all of our best stuff through the mailing list. You don't want to miss it, right? Anything that's like a super secret project or anything new that I'm trying out, my mailing list hears about it first. So you can join our mailing list at schoolofatelierarts.com. There's a little banner on the top. You can click to join our mailing list. Okay, so here is our core shadow. I am going to match it, starting with the color that I had. And remember that we're overlapping as we go, but that also we want a fairly soft edge leading back into our shadow. So I'm tiling a little bit both ways. I'm trying to soften the edge into the shadow side. And I'm also going to be pulling into the light side. Now, we are going to end up doing another pass on this project. So every time we cover the canvas, we call it a pass. Now, sometimes it's really hard for students to leave each individual tile alone once you lay it down. So it's really important that you can keep your notes clean, especially with form painting. What often happens is students see an edge and they try to smear it together and smear it together. And the next thing you know, they're like doing this up and down their sphere and they've lost all this beautiful nuance. Like this tile up here is not the same value as this tile down here. But students get lost, they get frustrated, and they start smearing them together, losing this really beautiful nuance. Remember that the form is turning in all directions, right? So this part of our sphere is lighter than up here because this part of our sphere is further away from the light source than this part down here, okay? So every tile is unique, and we need to make sure that we remember that and don't start smushing everything together. And welcome, Magritte. Good to have you here. All right. So, and welcome, Peter. Good morning, Peter. I don't know if I said hello to you yet, but good morning. Okay, so I'm just going to be following the same technique. I'm basically going from dark to light, but remember that every pass is just a little bit darker coming out of this because it's so much further away from the highlight. And we're also going to be overlapping our tiles. So I'm just working across my value scale, really, going from my 8 to my 7.5 to 7.25. Just working across carefully, methodically, one tile at a time, not panicking. That's the hard part. That one wasn't quite light enough. There's a visual memory that you'll discover, especially with tiling. I want to point something out. So this is my palette here, right? And I'm pulling from here, and then here, and then here, right? But when you are tiling for your first 100 times, so if you haven't done this 100 times yet, this may happen to you. What happens is you put down the tile, it's the perfect tile, and then you can't remember where you are on here. So one method to help students not get lost and to help them remember is every time you pull, say, oh, I'm at 7.5. So you say 7.5 to yourself. You can even say it out loud, 7.5, 7.5. And then when you come back and you can't remember where you were, you can say 7.5 and know where that is on your palette, right? It's really common that you'll put something down and then have no idea where you were around here. All right. So it takes a little bit of what we call visual memory. There's lots of ways that artists use visual memory, but eventually you just remember. You don't have to think about it. But your first 100 times tiling, you have to think about it, right? And it's going to use up, some of your RAM, some of your processing power up here in your brain. And by having a method, it develops into a habit, which becomes second nature to you, right? So if you find that you're getting lost, develop the habit of stating out loud what number you're on, and that will help you develop your memory to hit the right note every time. The reason these projects, like we're doing this project in maybe 10 to 15 hours ish, is what our total time working on this. And that's with me talking to you all the time. It's really common for students to spend 40 or even 60 hours on a sphere. Why? Because I have the experience to be able to put the note I intend to put down every time, but students are going to get lost on their palette, put the wrong note down, try to fix it, over fix it, under fix it. They'll get frustrated, they'll start smearing their tiles around, and then they need a new pass, right? So I try to give you a heads up of like what pitfalls are ahead, like warning, warning, right? But if you have a method, and this is why the School of Atelier Arts, especially in our online atelier painting boot camp, I see some of our students here in the chat. It's so much about methodology. And when you get coached by me 2 times a week, I'm enforcing this methodology. I'm helping you figure out where you got off track. I'm helping you figure out how to get on track. So many times in the with my students, especially in the painting boot camp, sometimes they'll show up being like, "Oh, I've ruined it. Should I start over?" And the reality is that they only messed up one little thing, but they're so demoralized from it that they think the whole painting is wrong. And this is the value of coaching that you get when you're actually training with an atelier trained artist. I see a few questions in the chat. How many tiles across do you recommend? Does it depend on the brush size? Yes, it depends on the brush size. But you want a brush that's proportionate to the tile or to your subject, and that'll determine how many tiles. So on my first band here, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-ish tiles, and this is a size 6 brush. Now, you guys might be working a little smaller than this. I made the sphere a little bit bigger because this is a demo. So you might be working with a size 4 brush, and you might end up with a few more tiles. Okay. Um, and yes, Ellen, it is good to know how long it can be, right? We have it in our head, and this is a very modernist idea that, oh, you have to produce quickly and you need to make 50 paintings a week. And like, that's just insane. Like that's a very new idea that's only been around for maybe 100 years in painting, right? Like if you're trying to paint realistically, if you're trying to apply hundreds and hundreds of years of artistic knowledge into your painting, it's going to take you more than 10 minutes to make your painting, right? And that's something that's so hard to get out of students' head because we're so bombarded by this idea of how an artist paints that this idea of atelier training is so foreign to us to slow down this much, right? But I painted 5 tiles this morning and we are almost 15 minutes into class, right? It's a slow process. Okay, and where am I? I know where I am because the last number I said out loud was 7 1/4. So I'm just gonna continue working my way across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And look at that. I'm in the right place because I was methodical about how I was remembering where I was. So even if you get disrupted, you can go back to it. Now remember that by the time we get here, we need to be at our lightest value. So we want to be making sure we're pacing ourselves to get to the light part by the time we need to get to the light part. And remember that this row has to be a little bit darker because it's further away. But as it approaches, it's going to start more closely matching the other tiles. It's really wonderful how many people have been coming to watch. Some of you are able to come live every day. A lot of people are sending me emails later in the day asking questions. Um, that are watching it later in the afternoon. And watching is really wonderful. I'm hoping that you're learning a lot, but applying this knowledge is very, very important too. So by the time we finish this sphere, I hope that you go back, start all over again, and start painting your own sphere because applying this knowledge is where the real learning happens. So many people like they sign up for a whole bunch of classes and they just watch and watch and watch and watch and they don't do. And that's why I designed the Atelier Painting Bootcamp so that not only am I encouraging you to do, but you have a cohort of people, not unlike, this cohort that's developing in this live stream, right? You guys are asking questions, bouncing ideas off of each other, sharing information, but you're also being held accountable for the doing, right? Sometimes we need a little nudge to help us achieve the goals that we set out for ourselves. And sometimes painting, especially at this level, can be really scary. And so having this twice a week commitment, having classmates helping nudge you along is a wonderful way to really accelerate your learning in art. Okay, and we made it to our center point here. And it's slightly darker coming out of here, just like we said it was going to be. All right. Do you see how each row is a little bit darker than the one above it? Because each row is a little bit further away from the light. There's also something about the rate of change. So sorry, I'm seeing a couple questions in the chat. I'm going to answer the chat questions first, and then we're going to talk about rate of change. Um, so, um, Oh, yeah. So Ellen's saying that she speaks out loud to remember where she is, especially when she's measuring flour. I love baking. I'm not a good baker because I'm not a precise person outside of painting. I'm a very chaotic person outside of painting. But yes, I definitely use the counting. And Peter, yes, I am wiping my brush between every tile. That's an important part of keeping the notes clean. Thank you for reminding us. We covered that extensively yesterday, but I did not mention it today. So thank you. And Leola, following along with charcoals is a fabulous idea. And yes, I'm glad that you ordered paints too. So you'll get a double whammy. You'll be able to solve some of your thinking problems going through it in charcoal. And when you get your paints, it should be an easier process for you. That sounds like a great plan. And that's true for anybody. Like anybody right now can draw a circle on a piece of paper and just try with a pencil to make a band like this, that this gradient from dark to light. Like anybody can do that right now. Like if I wait 10 seconds, you can go get a piece of paper and a pencil and do that, and it will help you learn. The more active your learning is, the more efficiently you learn and the more information you actually maintain in your brain. So we're going to take a 10-second break so anybody can go get pencil and paper, and I'm going to clear my throat with some hot coffee. Magritte said she did that. Yes, yes, Queen. Get it. Excellent. Ah, it's cold, man. The nectar of the gods, hot coffee in the morning. Okay. So I hope all of you have your paper. And even if you don't, you still have time because I'm not doing anything new. I'm just going to keep tiling from my shadow to my light. There is a thought. Okay, this is what I was going to say before I chastised all of you to go get your paper and your pencil. There is a rate of change when you are turning form. So, for example, this part of our sphere is more broad. And as it turns away, the pace of how quickly it's turning away from our light gets faster and faster. Okay. So, what that means is that this darkness is going from dark to light fairly fast here, but then the part from the middle value to the light is slower because we're seeing more of this plane of the sphere. If you thought of a sphere as like a bunch of hexagonal planes, this would be the biggest. And then as the planes turn away, they get skinnier and skinnier the more they turn away from you. And that's the rate of change. Um, yes, Ellen, get your pencil and paper. Yes. Yes. Okay. So the rate of change is happening because we're seeing the biggest part of this plane of the form, and we're seeing less and less of these other planes as they turn away from us. So it goes dark, dark, dark to like it stays darker here. And then by the time we get to the front plane, there's not as much change as quickly because we're seeing more of that plane. I wish I had like a sphere with planes. Maybe I'll make one. Let's see if I can figure out. See, these are the shenanigans I get up to in the Atelier Painting Bootcamp. I'm like, I need a sphere that is planes. How am I going to do this? It's just like the nerdy teacher inside. So I'll have to look that up. I don't even know what that's called, but I have the vision of it in my head. It's like a bunch of hexagons with like planes turning. I'll think about it and get back to you. Okay, so anyways, starting at dark, going to light, remembering where we are in each value, right? That seems a little dark, but that's okay. We're going to overlap our tiles there. Also, in this part of the sphere, you're going to overlap the tiles a little bit more because you have less space to get through all the values. Okay, I'm trying to go to the center. Do you see how I'm going a little bit this way? And that's just a byproduct of my tiles being wide. And really, I only need one more tile here because I want this to feel like it's wrapping towards the center. I don't want to be going across this way because that's not going across the form. Going through the highlight is going across the form. Okay. So we have something like that. I can get one more row in here, but it's going to be a really short row because in order to go to the center, do you see how I really only need this little triangle piece up here? Oh, Peter has a good suggestion with intersecting the sphere. Why not draw planes intersecting the sphere? Check out a calculus book. Oh, you're intimidating me with your calculus. Actually, I have a story, and I hope that this helps all of you believe in your art. Like, I thought because I was an artist that I'd be terrible at math, right? And I spent my high school years just assuming I was bad at math because I'm an artist, right? And then I wanted to go to grad school, and you have to take the GRE, which is like half math, right? And I was nervous about it because I wanted to go to grad school, but I'm not good at math because I'm an artist, right? And then I just got a tutor and studied, and it turns out that like you can learn math just like you can learn how to read or learn how to paint, right? And I was one question away from a perfect score on my math GRE. And it just blew my mind that if you just learn with somebody who knows how to do it, break down the information in a methodical way, practice each of the skills separately, combine them back together, that you can learn anything. And that really moved me, that experience. And that's how I teach art now. Like the way I learned finally how to do math is it really influenced my teaching of how I teach art. I break it down into smaller pieces. I have you add it back together and progress. And I believe that anybody can learn this. If anybody is out there being like Mandy was, like, oh, I can't do math, I'm a painter. If anybody's like, oh, I don't know if I can paint this way, that's BS. You can. Anybody can learn the skill set that has access to an atelier trained artist. Hello, I'm an atelier trained artist. And who does the work? Hello, all you people who got your pencil and paper. All right. And all of you people that are going to actually paint the sphere. Right. So anybody can learn this. It's an academic skill, it's a technical skill. I'm not here to tell you what art to make. I'm not even helping you make art. I'm giving you tools in a toolbox that you can use for anything that you want, right? I don't care what you make with these techniques, but what I do care about is that you'll never be trapped. You'll never not be able to create what's in your head and your heart because you didn't have the skill set to do it. Oh, we have a mathematician by training in the chat, then an artist. They are similar. They absolutely are. And there's like different approaches to painting too. There's a very mathematical approach to painting. There's a very what I would consider like a more intuitive approach to painting. But no matter whether you approach it mathematically or intuitively, you can't do either until you master the skill set, right? And then you can apply them in a more intuitive way or a more, mathematical way, but you have to have the skill set first. Right. And so that's what I hope to give you here in these lessons through the School of Atelier Arts, through our blog, through, our videos, all the things. And music. Absolutely, Carol. My mother's a music teacher, so I feel a lot of the similarities with music. Okay, that was a big tangent. Sorry. We're back to painting. We're just going to do this like little triangle shape here. All right, I might need to go to a smaller brush here because one, this triangle shape is small, and two, we're nearing our sacred edge, and we do not ever want to lose our sacred edge. It's sacred, right? All right, so moving to the smaller brush. This is, it seems like not a big deal. Oh, I switched brushes, right? But you don't need to know exactly what kind of brush or what size of the brush. What you do need to know is that you need a brush that's proportionate to the space that you're working and will help you solve the problem you're trying to tackle. In this case, I have a small space, so I need a smaller brush. And I need a brush that's small enough that's going to help me maintain my edge of the circle because that's really, really important. That was a little bit dark. That last tile I put down, that's too much of a darkness there. So if you need to lighten a tile, I only want to lighten it a little bit, but I have to overshoot the lightness because it's going to pick up the darker value underneath it. So instead of going a half value lighter, I need to go a whole value lighter so that it picks up what's underneath it and makes the color that I actually intended. All right. I'm trying to make sure that there's no little bits of canvas sticking through. You need to overlap your tiles enough to make sure that there's not any white bits of canvas. Like I see a little bit here. Um, you don't want that. It's going to totally mess up your observation of what value is actually underneath. Okay, so I put this darker value down, but I didn't soften the edge on the other side. And again, this is a tricky part because we have this edge that we want to be very mindful of. Okay, I'm going to leave it be for right now. It's more important that I get this covered than get sucked into something over here because How this is going to eventually look is going to depend a lot on finishing this sphere, finishing the tiling. And Peter's saying that many mathematicians he knows also play instruments or sing. Absolutely. Like, I always thought music was a mathematical formula in many ways because you have all those beats and you're dividing them up. But I mean, you could say the same for painting, right? We have 9 values, right? So music has an 8 tones. Western music has an 8-step note scale, right? An octave. But in painting, we use a 9-step scale, right? But it can be just as mathematical. If you're prone to thinking mathematically, tiling is a great fit, as a painting technique. And even if you're not prone to thinking mathematically, tiling can still help you, just like I think it was Ellen who was saying, it's like measuring um, flour for baking, right? So baking can be more of a, well, I guess cooking even more so is more loose, like a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But if you remember where you are, that has nothing to do with whether you're a mathematician or not. It's just developing your memory on the scale. Okay. All right. So now I have some choices to make. I can fill this in starting on the outside edge, going to the center, or I can start working down here because it's going to cross through all the way. If it's just me, I prefer painting this in, but because this is a teaching demo, I'm thinking that to be consistent for all of you students watching, that it would be better to keep thinking all the way through the highlight and across the form to the other side. So I think I'm going to go start working my way from the bottom. And by the time we get all the way down here, guess what? We should more or less have the whole thing covered. And there's some excellent commentary in the chat, talking about music and art and math and how, it basically comes down to practice, learning the techniques, discovering the techniques, and practicing them. Um, okay, let's see here. All right, so I'm going to start working this way. I need to, sorry, I need coffee on my throat for a minute. So continue our discussion for just a moment. We're going to take like a 15-second timeout here because I'm starting to lose my voice. Oh, the nectar of the gods. um, it's interesting. Another technique for learning how to paint well is looking at your subject from different angles. So either angling it away from you, towards you, turning it upside down, looking at it through a mirror so that it reflects it the opposite way. There's so many different ways to give what you call a fresh eye on a painting. But another technique is if you're looking at this video right now, if you focus on my eyes and try to look into my eyes and just peripherally let your eye look at the sphere. So you're looking at me, but you're using your peripheral vision to look at the sphere. It's a really wonderful way to get the overall impression of what's happening on the sphere. And so far, when I'm doing that, so I'm looking at the screen and I'm peripherally looking at my sphere, I'm feeling pretty good about the form on the sphere, how it's starting to look really, really round in my peripheral vision. Sometimes when we're just looking at it like straight on, we can get lost in it. It's called like looking myopically, like we're not seeing the whole. So using your peripheral vision to kind of glance over at it is a way to see things holistically. Okay. All right, back to down here. I'm gonna rotate you back. And I'm just gonna work this path and just kind of work down this way. Not a ton of I'm having a hard time with words this morning. Not a ton of new information. I am gonna have to move you guys over because you're in my way. Sorry about that. I hope that's still pretty clear for you. Okay. So again, marking our core shadow, softening it into our shadow on this side. I'm so tempted right now. I feel like the core shadow up here got slightly shifted to the left, and I'm so tempted to just take this dark color and go like this, right? Is anybody feeling like they want me to do that? I'm feeling it. But this is where the discipline comes. Get the sphere covered first. There's no point in moving the core shadow 10 times until you have enough reference information to know where it actually goes. Yeah, I see some yeses in there, right? It's so tempting, right? But as soon as we start doing that, then we start smushing everything together and we lose all this beautiful nuance, right? So now is not the time to fuss with the core shadow. Now is the time to put our best note down and move on. We're doing this right now, not this, okay? That can be for the next pass. We don't have to do it right now. You don't have to address everything that you see at the moment it comes into your mind. That is a recipe for chaos and messes in your painting. What you do want to do is decide what you're doing. In this case, I'm deciding to do this strip across here and stick to it. Do not let these other things suck you in. I'm a little bit on the dark side. So remember that if you are too dark, that you need to err on the side of a little bit lighter in order when it picks up what's underneath it to land where you want it to be. And now I've overshot it. Okay, there's a few things that you can do here. Like this is just too big of a jump between that value and that value. But overall, it's close to the value that I actually wanted here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay a tile between this value and my dark value so I don't have such an insane jump. All right. Do you see how I'm going back and forth? I'm starting to get that panic. Like, no, that's not what I wanted. Try to maintain your discipline one step at a time and you'll get it. There we go. Okay. So, not panicking, being disciplined, being methodical about how we're correcting our project here. And I did go back to the bigger brush. There's a question about that in the chat. Um, um, Leela's saying that when she was using the peripheral vision, that it really make the shape pop. Absolutely. It's a huge advantage to learn how to use your eyes physically and to hone your eyes. Like atelier training is about training your eye. People think it's about your hand and if you just hold the brush the right way or whatever. And yes, paint handling skills are part of learning how to paint, but it doesn't really matter what your material is if your eye is trained well. Actually, on this channel, on the School of Atelier Arts channel, you can see a drawing I did when one of my students was like, because I was saying you can draw with anything if your eye is trained well. You can draw with a Crayola crayon. And they were like, "Nuh-uh, prove it." And so then I did this entire cast drawing using a crayon, and you can see it on the YouTube channel if you visit the School of Atelier Arts YouTube channel. So I had never drawn with a crayon before. That was my very first drawing with a crayon. That if your eye is trained, there's a tiny bit of materials handling thing that you'll get used to with a new, material, but you can go arrange rocks outside. You can paint in oils or watercolor. People ask me all the time because they're like, "Oh, well, I'm a watercolor artist. I don't know if I can learn from you." And I'm like, "You're not learning how to paint in oils and you're not learning how to paint in watercolor. You're learning how to see. That is what you're learning." Excuse me. Oh, Magri's saying that she gets sucked in easily. I do too. I get sucked in all the time. So I'm glad that as someone else that is prone to being sucked into things, sometimes demonstrating how not to get sucked into things is the most valuable thing you can learn from me, right? But it was a hard fought victory, Magritte. It takes time to self discipline and self control. Especially, sometimes it's not because you're in despair. Sometimes it's because what's in front of you is so beautiful and you want to capture it right away. Tell me if this has ever happened to you. You see something, it's so beautiful. You sit down and you're trying to capture it before it disappears and you make a big mess, right? So there's a balance between your inspiration and keeping in what really moved your heart when you see it, and keeping enough discipline over your technique that you can actually create what it was that drew it to you in the first place, drew you to it in the first place. All right. And yes, go draw with your crayons with your granddaughter. I love it. I draw with my niece all the time, and my nephews. Some are more into art than others, but it's really wonderful drawing with crayons. It's a great joy. All right. Okay. So speaking of discipline, back to the thing that we're doing. uh, Oh, Peter's making a good point. Like, sometimes things are disappearing rapidly in plein air painting. Yes, because there's a light effect, or a certain angle of the sun, or sometimes a perfect cloud, and you're trying to capture it. That's where your visual memory really comes in. The people that paint landscapes from life, not the ones that like take a picture and paint from a photograph, or like the ones that are really out there trying to capture it as realistically as they can, not the ones that are doing imaginative painting, which is also really great. But the ones that are plein air painting consistently, trying to capture things, have some of the most developed visual memory of all the painters that I know. Because you have to, right? Like the cloud is not going to stay still for you. If you're going to paint a cloud, you have to take this momentary snapshot in your mind and keep that central to your thoughts while you paint it in, even as what you're seeing is changing, right? There are lots of people that develop or practice exclusively visual memory. Somebody I trained with, Paul Ingbertson, who also has a great YouTube channel. I encourage you to check it out. He trained with Gamel, R.H. Ives Gamel, in the Boston area, and he did some of the visual memory training with Gamel. And it was astonishing when he was showing me all of his sketchbooks and everything, how that actually worked and how that can help you as an artist. Like if you can look at a curvature of, the out, like maybe a profile of the face, for example, and have it memorized, and that the next day you can draw it, that is mastery of visual memory. But it's something that you can practice with little things and then get to more and more complicated things. You can start with just line drawing, like a profile of the face. And then maybe the next day you try to do profile of the face plus features. And maybe the next day you do profile of the face plus color, right? So it's something that you can practice in stages, trying to remember a little bit more each day. The name is Paul Ingbertson. I'll type it in the chat. The last name is Ingbertson, and I believe his YouTube channel is Paul Ingbertson. He has like 500 videos or something crazy out there, and if you're not used to the way he speaks at a pretty, he uses a lot of atelier language that you may or may not be familiar with. So I found that when I've recommended him to students before, that at first it feels like over your head a little bit, but if you can stick with it and you'll get used to how he's using different vocabulary, you can learn so much from him. But it's just that he starts at using words in a way that you're probably not used to hearing them be said. And so it's like reading an 18th century novel, right? Like once you get into the language, you understand it, but it takes like a couple chapters before your brain starts like processing that way of speaking. That's how he uses language, atelier language in these videos. Okay, so going across here, excuse me, going across here, I'm just going to keep going in a disciplined way now that we've gotten back on track. Oh, not that. Do you see how I was going lighter, 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 and then I got too dark? Okay, and remember that we're going across the form, right? So we're going this way. So now I'm going to pop over here to the other side. Students will start going like this, but remember, you're not going across the form if you're not going through the highlight. I think that was a little bit on the light side. I need to get a little bit darker here. I think that was too dark. So I want something in between. There we go. Now I'm starting to get close to the edge, so I'm going to switch back to my smaller brush. And very carefully, let me see, just a touch darker. Okay, because we have to be so careful about that edge. All right. Okay. Okay, so I see a comment in the chat. Peter saying, painting this way is painfully slow. How much different would it look if you blended larger areas? So eventually, so let me be clear, Peter, this is a student project. Painting a sphere with tiles like this is painfully slow, in part because it's a student project. And what it's trying to teach you is how to see really, really small increments of change over a form. Once you've done a few projects like this, like most of the painters I know rarely tile in their paintings, even though they're getting a lot of form. The tiling teaches you how to see nuance changes to create a really beautiful form. And then there are other ways to do it more quickly. However, I have yet to discover a better way to help students learn and discover these really small increments of change that create the form without tiling. So tiling is a technique. It's sometimes useful to you as a professional artist, but it's mostly like a training mechanism to like help you really focus on your form. It's kind of like professional basketball players still do basketball drills, or professional pianists still do scales, but they don't sit down at a concert and play a scale, right? So what's happening is that this is a way for you to practice seeing small changes of form, helping you understand how form works both in a micro way and in a big way, and to train your eye. Because remember, we're not training our hand, we're training our eye. And when you do this, you're going to train your eye to see small increments of form change. Oh, Ellen, I'm glad you're learning so much in this one lesson. It's funny, right? Because we're not doing anything different than we did yesterday, and yet there's so much more to it, right? Understanding the why is really helpful for students. So thank you for bringing that up, Peter. Like, why do we have to do it this way? Why can't we use a bigger brush? Why can't why can't we make it go quicker? But really, what you're doing is just training your eye, right? That's what atelier training is. When you train with me in the online atelier, I'm training your eye. I'm not teaching you how to be an artist. I'm teaching you how to paint using a lot of different techniques so that you can create anything you want without compromise. So Lisa has a great question. Where else would I use this technique? So let's say here, I have some random vases over here. Let's show you. Okay, so let's say I'm painting this cup here, this little metal cup right here. I'm not going to use tiling for the feathers. They're very flat. These are almost like straight planes, right? But if I really wanted to make this part of the cup feel really rounded, I would tile this here, okay? This is a bad example because there's so much texture on this face. But sometimes what helps is you paint the form under all that color work and detail on top, and then paint the detail on top, and it'll look so much more rounded overall than if you had just tried to match the colors on the base. So, sometimes tiling when you're painting a face, for example, there's some like a painting across the forehead. I'll often tile here. I'll tile to get the roundness of the nose. But I'm not going to tile the shadow. Sorry, this is the shadow side. I'm not going to tile the shadow, right? Just like I didn't tile this shadow. But the idea of form, anytime you want something really, really round, look at Rembrandt. Like people think, oh, why bother painting a portrait when you can just take a picture? But there's no photograph that has more dimension and dimensionality than a Rembrandt painting, especially the way he painted his noses. I mean, his noses are straight up spheres. I encourage you to go look at them. And Peter's saying a famous coach said that it's better to be very good at a few things rather than merely good at many. Especially with atelier training, my job is to give you the techniques, and there's going to be different techniques that appeal to each one of you, right? And you're going to really master some of them, and you're going to have others that are in your back pocket for when you need them, but they're not your go-tos, right? Some people love tiling. They'll tile their whole life, right? And it just really suits them. They just really like the control over the form, right? And other people, maybe care more about the edge than they do about tiling. They might lose all these tiles in here just because they want a really, really soft edge, kind of how we didn't tile this edge, but we got a really soft edge over here. So I'm not here to tell you which techniques are right or wrong to use for what. I'm here to give you the techniques so that whatever you're trying to achieve, you can achieve it. Oh, I'm glad, Ellen, that you're enjoying the entire sphere lesson. Just awesome. Excellent, excellent. Okay. We are almost out of time today. I'm just going to finish this one last tile. Actually, we kind of finished going across here. I feel like I need one more tile right here to finish that pass that I kind of cheated it a little bit. There we go. Now I feel like it's going across. Okay, except for that's too light. See, I tried to rush it. I was going out of order. I saw something and just tried to plop something in there without being thoughtful about it, and I made it too light. That's better. Okay. Okay. So I am going to stop there for today. I thought we were going to do this in 3 days. It's going to be 4. Atelier training just takes as long as it takes, right? So tomorrow we'll continue working kind of down the bottom of this year. We'll see if we get the first pass done tomorrow, but I'm not going to commit to it and rush through it just to do it. It takes however long it takes, so get those like arbitrary deadlines out of your head and you'll have a more peaceful painting process. Yes, I see the autocorrect issues in the chat. That's funny. It's okay. We know what you meant, Leola. Okay, I am going to stop there for today. Thank you all for joining me. It's lovely having you here. We'll pick it back up tomorrow, and it looks like we're going to end up going into one more week because we still have a lot of work to do on this sphere. Oh, Shirley, thank you so much for being here today. I would love for you to join us in the boot camp in the future. If you are making it through this lesson, you would like the boot camp. Like, if you like what you're learning in this free class, you would like the boot camp. It's like this all the time. That's what we do. We learn a lot. And Leola's like a fan of tiling. Excellent. Now, Leola, after you get your paint and you try it, then tell me if you still like tiling, because it's something that people like and then they hate and then they love. In my experience, for the most part. It's not a straight line. People think that training goes like this, right? Like you start here and it's just like this, and it's not. It's like it's like you're on top of the world, and then the next day you're a little demoralized, and then we cheer you up in the boot camp, and then you go on to greater things. Well, Ellen, you're welcome in our boot camp whenever you're ready. I think you'd be a great fit. I think anybody that's able to like actually come and consistently show up like you all have been this week, you have what it takes to be in the boot camp. Yes, don't we all like there's an painters are so used to being in isolation all the time, and we think we're supposed to learn in isolation, and that's not how if you want to be a realistic artist, that's not how any realistic artist ever trained like alone in a studio. Like nobody learned in isolation. They learned in ateliers. That's where ateliers came from. That's why they exist. That's why this training has been handed down for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years from artists to groups of students, right? So I hope when you all are ready to take your training to the next level that you'll join us in the boot camp. Peter, I'm not sure I understand your question. Is that what is known as painterly? I think I was yapping too much and don't know which part of my yapping you were referring to. If you could clarify. Yes, and Ellen, yes, that I need all of that. Yeah, you need the moral support. It's hard to learn how to do something that is technically the hardest thing in that field, right? Like when you are in atelier training, there's maybe a few thousand people in the world that have atelier training, and collectively they have the highest levels of technical painting knowledge in the world, and that's what you're trying to learn right now, right? Like you're basically in like the boot camp for professional basketball in art. That's what this is. That's what atelier training is. And most people never find it, and you have. That's amazing. Oh, Peter is clarifying. So lots of small strokes showing each plane of the sphere. Yes, that's a more painterly approach. But keep in mind, some people are like, oh, I want a painterly approach, but they don't understand the underlying theory, right? So you can do this as like each tile could be considered a little mini plane, and that can be considered painterly. But some people without the training are like, oh, I want to paint painterly, but they break the form. They'll put a dark spot here and a light spot in the shadow, and it kills the form, but they're painting in planes, but they don't understand the underlying form, right? So it's not like people think, oh, I'm going to paint this way or that way. But if you understand how light reveals form, you can paint with all sorts of different techniques, really loose techniques, really tight techniques, really scratchy techniques. But if you understand the underlying form, it will still read beautifully. If you're just doing a technique and throwing it on there without that underpinning, you're going to create kind of a flat form, which maybe is what you want, but it's not done with intention. It's done out of ignorance. And my hope for all of you is that you paint out of knowledge. I gotcha. All right. All right, everybody. That's all for today. Thank you again for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Cheers.